I started in Braniff February of 1959, and my father didn't want me to do it. He said, I'm just going to be a glorified waitress. And he wanted me to finish college, but I quit college and went for an interview, but I didn't tell anybody I was going for an interview because it was very, very competitive back then. And for every girl, I don't know how many they hire, how many they interview now, but back then they hired about one girl for every 300 or 400 people that they interviewed. Then you had to wait for your letter. I get excited just thinking about it. But anyway, I went home and my letter came, and my father was very staunch, and he'd been a coach and everything, and he said, did you get, your letter came? And I said, well, I'm afraid to open it. He said, well, open it. And I said, no, I can't open it. I get excited thinking about this. And so anyway, he said, I know you got it, you open it. And I opened it and I got it. You couldn't be married, so some of them would get married, but they wouldn't tell anybody, But if they found out they were married, of course, they would lose their jobs. And if you weighed in and you weighed more than 132 pounds, well, they say, no, you can't take this trip. They'd call up a reserve. But most of the flight attendants back then didn't fly more than about 18 months because they got picked off because they were single, and most of the men that flew, a lot of them were single. So a lot of them ended up marrying their passengers, and a lot of them ended up marrying pilots. There's only one flight attendant per aircraft. We had DC-3s and Convairs. DC-3 carried 21 to 24 passengers. A Convair carried 44 passengers, and we had DC-6s and 7s, but we didn't have those out of Kansas City where I was based. And the very first flight I ever took alone, I had Joan Crawford on board. And she was going, her husband had just died, and she was going to Omaha to dedicate a Pepsi-Cola plant. And so she got on board the plane, and she had a green dress on, I remember, and she had on ankle-strap shoes, and she was covered with freckles, and she had red hair. And she had her entourage with her. There were like 7 people, and we didn't serve drinks back then, so she had a cooler full of drinks and for all of her people. Well, about halfway there, we got into a terrible thunderstorm. Omaha always had bad storms in the Midwest. And so we had to turn around and go back to Kansas City. And she said, oh, can I talk to the pilot? And I said, well, they're pretty busy, So, but one of them came back and talked to her. The co-pilot only had a pilot and a co-pilot on a DC-3. And he said, well, it'll be just fine. Also, I had Herbert Humphrey on the flight one time. And I had Lawrence Welk. I was on a flight one day when everybody on the whole airplane got sick. And except me and the co-pilot. And I just was sitting in the back passing up air sickness bags, A kinder, gentler time, too. You hardly have any females that flew. So when you had a female on board, that was pretty unusual. You didn't have families that flew. You had mostly businessmen. And I remember one day this businessman showed me all these credit cards. And I said, well, what are those? And he said, well, these are cards that you can use when you go into a restaurant. I said, oh, that's crazy. I said, that'll never work, and so that's the first time I ever saw a credit card. I was 19 years old. Well, back then they thought we were pretty special because there weren't a whole lot of planes and there weren't a whole lot of flight attendants. So when we walked through the airport, we were just like little prima donnas, This is a winter uniform. This is gray, and that was designed by Terry Labus, and she was a hostess with Braniff, and you see the label in there. And that's the hats that we had to wear, and we had another wing like that on our hat.
And that's that clip B that you
That's
talked
a
about.
clip B. And this is our summer uniform, and we wore blue and white spectators with that. It was really jazzy. We had a white blouse underneath that. And anyway, we were very elegant. The culture at Southwest is very similar to the culture at at Braniff. Were both very family oriented, and you made a lot of lifelong friends. My best friend that I talk to every day, and she and I call each other every day, be sure we're still alive, because she's single and I'm single. And she works at a travel agency. And a lot of my friends that I worked at Braniff with, they went on and worked at EDS. And a lot of the people I worked at Braniff, and a lot of them still work at Southwest.